Welcome back to the Life on Books podcast. I'm your host, Tony. With me, as always, is Andy, a.k.a. Metafictional Meathead. And today we're talking about the best opening lines or passages or first pages, our favorites.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. That's the topic. So let's get into it. But, of course, we'll always start with a reading update. And, Andy, you can go first.
Don't have a ton. I finished Tree of Smoke, which was really good. I really enjoyed it. I know I talked about it a lot last week when we were talking about Hard Rain Falling, and how much I was enjoying it, how much I was looking forward to, how much it made me want to go back and reread Angels now that, there's a little bit more of a backstory for the Houston brothers. But yeah, it was a really great novel, really intriguing and complex narrative. Kind of similar to what I was saying about Hard Rain Falling in the sense that, it's not the type of book being so narrative and character driven that I really expected to get into as much as I did.
Yeah.
But it was a really great novel and I really enjoyed it. And I guess not that I've read a ton of Johnson's work, but I've read a little bit, especially mostly his earlier stuff.
Yeah.
The 2 or 3 books I've read are from his earlier in his career. I could sort of see why people were kind of made the criticism oh, he just kind of did something a little formulaic to try and, have a little bit more of a critically acclaimed novel, but I still thought it was great. So I think it's kind of I wouldn't say foolish criticism, but unnecessary.
Well, so for those listening that may not be familiar, if you go onto Goodreads and look up Tree of Smoke, probably the highest ranked, I don't know how they display them, maybe by how many people liked it or whatever.
Yeah.
But the most popular review on there is quite lengthy, and it's just a complete bashing of the book. There's a book called How to Win a Pulitzer Prize or something like that, and the person goes through each point of that book and then shows how Tree of Smoke did that. But I didn't really read the review that thoroughly to know if the points this person was making were correct or not. However, what I will say about it is it doesn't really matter to me because when I read the book, nothing about it felt formulaic.
Right.
And in fact, I think it was a polarizing book because of how odd it was.
Yeah.
And maybe you could make the argument it was odd because he just went and checked these boxes, but I don't know. I feel like the type of people who pick a book up that they don't know about because it won some type of award or have Oprah's book club on the cover. I don't think those types of readers would enjoy Tree of Smoke.
No. And I know the review you're talking about, and I don't necessarily think the points that person made were incorrect. Excuse me. But I think if you went into reading Tree of Smoke, with that kind of viewpoint in mind and kind of that reading it through that lens, it might affect your reading. But if you just are oh, I like Denis Johnson, or this book sounds interesting,
Yeah.
it shouldn't affect it too much. And none of that stuff stood out.
Yeah, I have a lot more to say about it, but we're going to do a whole episode on Denis Johnson, so I'll save it for that. So anything else in your reading update?
Yeah, and I finally got around to starting Solenoid by Mircea Cartarescu. Recently won the Dublin Literary Award, and I've seen a few other people that I follow had recently finished it or been reading it or whatever. And it's been sitting on my shelf for probably over a year now, and I was like, all right, now's the time, and I can about a quarter of the way through, and I can understand where all the hype is coming from. It's really beautifully written and kind of
when was it written?
It was the English translation was published in 2022, the tail end of 22.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look up to see when it was originally published in Romanian. Within the last decade, it looks like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 2018, 2019, maybe.
Yes.
17. Oh, 2000. The earliest I see on Goodreads is 2016. So I'm going to go with that.
Gotcha.
If I'm incorrect, please let us know. Oh, 2015. 2015.
Cool.
So.
And anything else that you're working on?
No.
All right.
A few other books with bookmarks in them, but I haven't picked them up recently enough to talk about them.
Yeah. I just finished Mehmed, My Hawk, yesterday by Yashar Kemal, the Turkish writer. It was cool. It was not what I expected. You wouldn't like it. If 100 Years of Solitude and The Long Ships by Franz G. Bengtson would have a baby, that was this book. So it kind of had that very simplistic writing style of kind of like a folklore, allegory, adventure tale. But it had the like giant cast of characters like 100 Years of Solitude, some kind of repetitive themes, and a little bit of disguising some serious topics with simple writing and buffoonery of the characters. It was written probably 10 or 12 years before 100 Years of Solitude, and it's almost like pre-magical realism. So there's no actual magic in the story, but there's a lot of characters that are treated as if they did have like supernatural elements to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it was cool. I enjoyed it. It was like it was an engaging read. And then I did a little bit of reading about the history of Turkey and kind of like because there was definitely some moments where I was like, this is trying to say something, but I'm not getting it because I'm just not familiar with the history.
Right.
So there was a lot in there about kind of like warring factions within the Turkish culture that he was alluding to with some of the story. And then this morning I just started The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck, which won the Nobel Prize, or she won the Nobel Prize for that in 1932. I'm only one chapter in, so like maybe 25-ish pages. So far it's good. Also pretty straightforward writing, and I was it wasn't like a great choice after finishing Mehmed, My Hawk, because I was like kind of itching for something a little bit more dense. But it's fine. I'll just read it more quickly. Get to the next thing. And then I'm still chipping away at Hamas, From Resistance to Regime by Paola Caridi, which is just a mind-blowing book. She just knows so much about what's going on over there. There's a little bit lost in translation. So it was originally written in Italian because she's Italian. And then the person who translated into English, I don't think is a native English speaker. So there's definitely some stuff that you read a sentence and you're like, okay, I know every word in that sentence, but contextually in this paragraph, I don't know what you're trying to say.
Gotcha.
And it's nothing like, it's none of the super important details. It's just kind of like the framing, I guess. What's interesting about it is the book has 2 prologues. One is just the prologue, and then the other one is labeled emotional prologue, and just kind of strange. In that, Caridi talks a lot about the kind of the 8 years that she spent living in Jerusalem and, doing this work. There's definitely, I think, in kind of like modern political books, there's a lot of like, how did you write this book so quickly type of thing. And it kind of gives me pause. Like, is this just a giant opinion piece?
Right.
But I mean, the fact that she lived there for 8 years, was part of the culture, certainly was exposed to a lot of the danger of living in that region.
Right.
I think gives it a lot of credence. So that is where I'm at.
All right.
So before we dig into some of our favorite opening lines and passages, should we discuss the most controversial video I've ever made on social media?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, so I assume most of the people that listen to this podcast probably follow either one of us on social media, possibly both. And I had posted a mostly joke video of 5 books that if I saw you reading in public, I would avoid you. And a lot of the inspiration from that came from the video I'd done prior, which was 5 books. If I saw you reading in public, I would be your friend.
Mm-hmm.
And that video was wildly popular, but I got dozens of comments on that one on multiple platforms. Basically one of 2 things: either now I know what books not to read, or what was the other one? Oh, it was like, if you came up to me while I was reading, I'd be pissed, or like, you're not a real reader because like you would know not to approach somebody reading. And it's just like, okay, well, it's a little contextual.
Right.
If you're like sitting next to somebody on a train and they're reading a book you like, I'm sure they would probably be open to having a discussion about it.
Right.
If they're like sitting in a library, that's a little different, So
Right. I also think that comes down to like just a little bit of awareness. Like you just kind of said, like contextually, like if I, saw you reading Hard Rain Falling out in public, if I was next to you on the train, I might say, oh, I read that. It's a really great book.
Yeah.
And
right.
if you were like, yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far, and then went right back to reading.
Exactly.
Okay. End of conversation.
Right.
Or if you were like closed it and then like started talking to me about what you're enjoying about the book, then we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would also be annoyed. Like if I was reading something and someone was like, that's a great book. And then I was like, yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And went back to reading it. And like, you kept trying to talk to me. Like it's just all context.
Yeah.
Like,
You just have to be able to read people's body language and tone. And so anyway,
you should be able to read the room as well as the book.
Yeah. And so I thought it would be funny to do just the antithesis to that. There's very few books where if I saw somebody reading them, I would harshly or seriously judge them. And what was surprising to me, so, okay, well, I'll spoil the 5 books for those that may have not seen the video. It was Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, and 12 Rules for Life from Jordan Peterson. Now, I'm not a Colleen Hoover fan. Let's start there. I've never read It Ends With Us. However, I have a copy of that book because my partner was reading it. And so clearly, if, she's reading it and I'm not judging her, I'm not going to be judging,
Right.
just some random person. Like, do I think Colleen Hoover, do her books appeal to me? No. But if you enjoy them, like, okay, cool. That's great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'd rather you read Colleen Hoover than not read. The Jordan Peterson, I've been quite outspoken about the fact that I don't like him. So that was a little bit of just throwing that in there just to kind of, and I think primarily a lot of the people that follow me feel similarly about Jordan Peterson. So that was just a little like tip of the cap to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I will be 100% honest that when people get really, really upset, just when I say almost nothing that serious about Jordan Peterson, that gives me a chuckle. So there was a little bit of, me being a dink, I guess. But the first 3 books are some of your favorite books.
Yeah.
They're books that I've also, partaken in reading. even though I haven't completed either Infinite Jest or Gravity's Rainbow. But clearly a Thomas Pynchon fan.
Right.
You know, I didn't dislike what I was reading of Infinite Jest. I just was not into it when I was reading it. And was like, I just need to do this at another time. I just was not in the right space. So it was a little bit of like, just kind of making fun of myself, making fun of you, like just having a laugh with my friends. And I thought, and this is 100% on me, I thought I had done a good enough job making it seem like a not very serious video, because I literally say It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover is the same as Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Like, if you know anything about those books, you know, okay, that's just not correct.
Right.
And then I made a joke about Thomas Pynchon fans hiding money in the walls because they're paranoid. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
And so apparently it was very upsetting. What's your take on it?
Well, I thought it was, you know, I remember like I saw it and I saw the kind of like the hook, and then you let off with Infinite Jest, and I was like, this motherfucker. And then you hit Gravity's Rainbow, and then and like I realized it was joking. You know, you were joking around, but I was just like, God damn, dude. Like, but I think if you look through the comments, it was really funny. Like, you had fans of those first 3 books, like, in on the joke.
Yeah.
Who very quickly realized, like, you're laughing with us, not at us.
Right.
And then I don't remember really seeing any comments from like Colleen Hoover fans. I
Not
think
a one.
they were, yeah.
Not a one.
And then all of the Jordan Peterson fanboys were like stomping their feet and all upset about it.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I just thought it was kind of funny the different people, types of people you were poking fun at, and the ones who realized that like it's not that serious.
Sure.
And the ones who couldn't take a joke.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
I wasn't like personally offended, but I saw it and I was like, God damn, man. Like,
well, it's funny because when I film, a lot of times when I film like lists like that, like the videos that have multiple books mentioned in them, I don't always necessarily cut them into the edit the same order that I filmed them in.
Mm-hmm.
And so initially I had made the Jordan Peterson joke and the Infinite Jest that I filmed those like back to back.
yeah.
And then I was like, oh, this will actually be better if I put it at the end, because I was actually thinking of you specifically. I was like, Andy's going to watch this and see Infinite Jest, Gravity's Rainbow, and Blood Meridian and be like, what the hell, man?
Yeah.
And it's not like necessarily the smartest thing to do to make content that's kind of an inside joke. However, like the people that are listening to this podcast, for example, are like the people that we actually have like probably the closest similar tastes to, and I knew would like understand the humor of it. Yeah, to be completely fair to anyone that likes 12 Rules for Life, not every single comment about it is like, you fat, ugly, bald, stupid moron. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
But some people are like, yeah, I'm not really a fan, but I did read it and I found some value in it. Like, cool, totally fine, whatever. But yeah, it was interesting the dichotomy between the two. On TikTok, there was a fellow who was just hell-bent on telling me that I was a pretentious douchebag for judging people for what they're reading. And I didn't spell this out for him, but it was kind of funny to me because it was like, okay, here's a book that I own, that I've read some of and I'm going to continue to read. And there's a joke about people who like that book being pretentious. And I'm making fun of myself, and you are upset about that and then calling me the pretentious one. It's like, I think taking it too seriously makes you pretentious. That's like the irony of it. And that's kind of what I was going for. And look, if at the end of the day, if you are upset by anything I say, whether it's a joke or intended to be a joke or serious, I just want to remind you that my opinion does not matter. read what you want to read, like what you like. I'm not an authority. I'm not the arbiter of what is good and what is not good. So don't put that much. I mean, I appreciate that people come to us for book, recommendations and take our reviews seriously. That's cool. But like, you love books that I don't like. I love books that you don't like.
Right.
And we're good friends and have a lot of similar tastes. So,
and we're able to come together once a week and
right.
spend an hour and a half bullshitting about books.
Right. So, and to be fair, I'm not a comedian, so maybe my humor just didn't land. I'm totally open to that critique. So anyway, anything else you want to say about that?
No.
Okay. Why don't you kick it off?
This podcast is canceled. That's what
We're canceled. We're canceled. Who knew that reading books would be so controversial?
Yeah, right.
So we're going to talk about our favorite opening lines or opening passages. Obviously, mine is A Tale of Two Cities. No, I'm just kidding. I tried to do some stuff that was a little off the beaten path. But why don't you start?
Yeah, I tried to do the same, but
we didn't pick a specific number. We both have 5 or 6.
I have
books.
6 here.
Yeah.
I think when we first spoke about it, we had said 5. Yeah. I have 6 because there's one that I just couldn't leave out.
Sure.
And I think it will tie into one of my others, kind of a comparison I want to make, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to pick a few that, weren't as well known. It's funny. Chris Villa, who runs the Leaf by Leaf YouTube channel, he has a video of like his favorite opening lines. And he's got, I think it's the New York Public Library had released like had put out like a mug that's just got famous opening lines all over it, which I actually have. But his kind of challenge was to pick books that were not on that mug.
Interesting.
And I sort of tried to do the same.
Yeah.
Just pick ones that maybe weren't as well known.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple in here that were on that mug, but whatever. They're great opening lines, and
yeah,
I think they should be acknowledged. So I'm gonna kick it off with probably the most obvious choice, in my opinion. Probably the best opening line in all of literature, in my opinion.
Wow, bold claims here, people.
It's 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buenda was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice.
It is great.
Right? Like, it's just so much in a single sentence.
Yeah. I remember when I first read the book, you had hyped it up quite a bit, and I was like, all right, I'm going to tackle this. And it was actually the first book I read of the last year, I think. And I read that first line and I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
What am I getting myself into?
Yeah. But like and there's so many, it's just such a good opening line. It sets up so much of what's going to happen in the book. You're like, why is he facing a firing squad?
Yeah.
Like, discovering ice is kind of a weird thing. Like,
yeah, you certainly take, now you and I as white Americans living in 2024 take that concept for granted. Yeah.
Right. Knowing what ice is and not just having access to it, but like understanding the concept of ice is pretty, like you said, taken for granted. And it's just a really powerful, and there were so many when I was reading, I read Jorge Luis Borges' collected fictions after I had read this, and there were a lot of stories in there that had kind of similar openings, like, someone sitting on their, maybe not in front of the firing squad, but like sitting on his front porch and remembering this event in his life. And it's just, I just think it's such a fantastic opening line that like it just sticks with you.
Yeah.
So long after you read it that I just couldn't leave it out.
Yeah, you made my life tough because I knew you were going to pick that, and I also wanted to put it on there, but I didn't want us to have any overlap.
Right.
And for the record, Andy and I do not check with each other usually before we have these discussions. So you're seeing the raw Life on Books podcast. Anything else you want to add about that?
No.
Okay.
You should read 100 Years of Solitude if you haven't yet.
Yeah,
which can pretty much be said for all of the books that I'm going to mention today, or I think I say that like almost any time we talk about a book, like you should read it. But like if we're talking about a book on the podcast, unless we're, very explicitly trashing it, you should read that book.
One thing I will add about 100 Years of Solitude is, and this is a very minor spoiler, so if you have not read it, just be aware of that, but it's not really going to spoil much. There is some discussion in the book about bananas and some just like political issues around the import and export of bananas. And what was really interesting to me about the book is just before I had read 100 Years of Solitude, I had read The Lost City of the Monkey God. I apologize to the author. I'm forgetting his name. It's a nonfiction, and it's about some scientists and archaeologists that go to Honduras to find potentially a city, a lost city that's been, forgotten and overgrown by jungle. And there's a lot in that book about the history of the United Fruit Company and their political dealings. And so the United Fruit Company was this gigantic corporation, one of the richest corporations in the world in the early 20th century. And they literally colluded with the U.S. government to stage a coup in Honduras, and I think they had some impact on some other South American countries, Central and South American countries, because essentially what had happened was the UFC, the United Fruit Company, was just exploiting the hell out of all the people in this region to import fruit into the United States, and they voted in you guessed it, socialist leader that put the kibosh on that and said nope, and changed all the laws and made it much less profitable for them. And of course, the corporation didn't like that. The United States were scared of the big bad S word of socialism. So we got together with the CIA and basically took this dude out and put in a puppet government. I'm probably butchering a lot of the facts, so don't take this at face value.
If anyone wants to look up more of the facts, you can research Operation Condor.
Yeah, and so recently in the news this past week, I don't know if you saw, but Chiquita, which is now the United Fruit Company became Chiquita, they were just found to have paid insurgents.
I did see that.
Yeah. A few $1 million, last year or the year before. I don't know. So not good. It's still going on. But there's a lot of in 100 Years of Solitude that you might not know about, particularly if you were, just went through public school education in America. We don't really learn too much about Latin America. And so there's a lot of culturally important things to the book that you might just miss. And it was just happenstance that I had that kind of preface. And there's also another book that I have not yet read, but I want to, and I just bumped it up my list because of what just happened with Chiquita. It's called The Fish That Ate the Whale, and it's about the guy who was the CEO of the United Fruit Company. So looking forward to reading that. So anyway.
Right on.
Yeah. Read 100 Years of Solitude. Okay. My first pick is Something Happened by Joseph Heller. I thought it would be funny to start with this one because I actually have not read this book. However, I have a ton of books that I haven't read because I have a book buying problem. But what I do enjoy doing is I do love pulling random books off my shelf and just reading a little bit from them. Sometimes I'll read the first couple pages. Sometimes I'll just open up to a random page and start reading. That might seem like a bizarre practice, but I enjoy doing it. And so I have read the first page of this before, and when we decided to do this, It made me think of it. And so I'll just read you the first paragraph because it's kind of interesting and funny. I get the willies when I see closed doors, even at work, where I'm doing so well now. The sight of a closed door is something enough to make me dread that something horrible is happening behind it, something that is going to affect me adversely. If I am tired and dejected from a night of lies or booze or sex or just plain nerves and insomnia, I can almost smell the disaster mounting invisibly and flooding out toward me through the frosted glass panes. My hands may perspire and my voice may come out strange. I wonder why. Something must have happened to me sometime. It's just a very bizarre.
Yeah.
Definitely catches your attention. Like,
Definitely.
What the hell is this about? Fits well with the title. Something happened. If you're not familiar with Joseph Heller's writing style, I would say it could be considered very early postmodern, kind of that pedantic, ridiculous. There's a thread of humor running through most of it. So I am going to read the rest of this book this year for sure. As most people know that listen to the show, Catch-22 by Heller is my favorite book. So
It's funny you said that you were picking something that you haven't read yet, because I know I sent you a picture of it the other day. Like, I almost wanted to put Solenoid on my list because I like.
Yeah, that opening paragraph was cool.
Yeah. It's kind of skin crawling in a way, but
it's got to be tough to write a strong opening line and page. It's probably one of the biggest challenges I think that writers face.
Probably.
I was listening many years ago to a very prolific author. I don't recall who it was, talk about the writing process, and he said, like, most people have like the idea for the beginning and the idea for the end, but the middle is very vague, and like how to start is like so hard.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Something that's just kind of coming into my mind now. I don't think it has the same kind of like punch in the face as like, 100 Years of Solitude or some other things. But, when I was making my list, I was kind of like, my instant thought process was kind of like, oh, like some of my favorite books, things like that. And so obviously, I grabbed Infinite Jest, and there's nothing about that that's like a super, I shouldn't say super powerful, but like, I think the opening line is just like, I am in here.
yeah.
Or, it's nothing crazy. But I found out after I read it, or someone had pointed out that, there's a lot of allusions to Hamlet throughout the book. And if you kind of pay attention closely to it, the opening line of Infinite Jest is actually like a direct response to the opening line of Hamlet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think the opening line of Hamlet's like, who's there? Or something like that. I am.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Nice.
it's just kind of something cool, kind of going into like the thought process of your opening line.
Yeah.
So, which is also kind of funny. I don't know how true it is, but I had read somewhere that I think it was like the third or fourth chapter in Infinite Jest for a while was actually like the opening chapter of the novel, and then it kind of got shifted around, and then it ended up working out like that.
Yeah.
So
I always do wonder kind of how much there is of that kind of rearranging.
yeah.
So I don't know. All right.
So
What's your next pick?
if you're looking for something dense to read, you were saying that earlier. Now's your time to grab Infinite Jest.
Yeah, I should.
So actually don't, because I just told someone I wasn't going to read that anytime soon, and if you read it, I'm going to want to read it. My next pick is The Garden by Aidan Scott. I was, again, talking about this last week. Talked a lot about how the kind of portrait of the landscape is written so beautifully, and it's very descriptive. And the opening line is like a really good example of that. The plain was dry and cold and covered in an icy sheet, for there had been no sun in that place, no font of warmth, until one chimeric morning the sun first dawned above a distant hill and spanned the horizon line with its pallid and steaming glare, illuminating the new cerulean firmament, and below it the shades of earth came to life as if a brush were dragged over paper, a watercolor iconography captured across mossy stones.
It's very descriptive.
Yeah.
Is the whole book like that?
More or less.
Nice.
So.
You read that recently, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Within the last month or so.
Yeah.
So I think I read it like over a weekend.
Nice. Well, fairly, looks like it's, what is it, 350 pages maybe?
I think about there. Let's see. Those are all notes and acknowledgments. 342.
Ooh, look at that. I got the
Good eye. Good eye.
Who's the publisher in that? Because I remember when I was
Anxiety Press.
Yeah, when I was looking up to link it, they didn't have it on bookshop.org. I had to go to Amazon, I think.
I think that's the only place I've seen it.
Yeah. And even then, I think it was like not really available. It was like maybe from just used sellers at that time. I don't know. I'll have to go back and look. Don't take my word on that. Or just click the link. That'll be in the bio of this video and you can figure it out.
But yeah, it's a fantastic book. If you enjoy any of the books that we talk about here, I think you will really like it. I was actually talking to someone the other day, a week or so ago, on Instagram about how like kind of the current state of the publishing industry and how it's a lot of like, I guess, fast fiction type stuff where it's just stuff that's like churned out without a ton of substance, to appeal to TikTok and Instagram and things like that. And just kind of flash in the pan type stuff. Not anything with really any real like literary merit. And then something like this comes along, published by a small press, a very unknown author, and just nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
And all of these, new books that are being overshadowed by just watered down crap.
Yeah, it's a struggle sometimes, especially if you're trying to make content about books and kind of like grow a community. Because on the one hand, you do need to talk about books that people are already interested in, because that's just going to help you reach more people. People are going to click with it more. But at the same time, you don't want to just exist to like, I just want to get more views on my video.
Right.
You want to like talk about books that you're passionate about and also help expose people in your community to books they may not have heard of. So it's a fine balance. The other tough thing as a reader, and I so often compare reading and books to the music industry, I see a lot of parallels because this was very common in the music industry, which was there's pop music and then there's like the good stuff.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, there's some popular books that are fantastic. There's some popular musicians and bands that are fantastic. But I think the best of the best is kind of hidden away. And the reason for that may be, popular stuff kind of has to appeal to the lowest common denominator of consumer for it to become popular. But the challenging thing can be that sometimes people overhype something due to its obscurity. And that's where some of that kind of like hipster or pretentious stereotypes come into play. And that's not always the case, but I definitely have read some stuff that people were like, this is amazing. And I'm like, no, you just like this because like two people have heard of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's so esoteric that it's just cool to you. So it's always a tough thing. And I take it really seriously too. And I know you do too. Like, reading time is so valuable that you wouldn't want to hype a book that wasn't actually good.
Yeah.
But also, I've heard people say, and I have no idea if this is true or not, but like we kind of think of like, oh, back in the day, the great writers were the popular ones. But I've heard people say like that wasn't true then either. Like in Charles Dickens' time, like it
Nobody cared about Moby Dick.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where I'm looking at it from. It's like, nobody cared about Moby Dick when it was first published. Something like The Recognitions, like that got terrible reviews when it was first published.
Yeah.
And when JR was published 20 years later, like it was getting all these comparisons to Joseph Heller, Vonnegut, Thomas Pynchon.
Yeah.
And I think you could almost make the case that like those authors wouldn't exist without, or they wouldn't have written those works without the recognitions like that.
Right.
If you kind of look at like, there are a lot of people, myself included, that look at the recognitions as like the first postmodern novel, really kind of kickstarted that whole era of post-World War II fiction. And I just think now with the advent of social media and how we're able to, talk about books so much more freely and frequently, I don't have to be a literary critic to share an opinion about a book. I just think that, we should try to promote these good books now. This is The Garden is a phenomenal novel. I think people should read it, whether they go and get a copy because I said it and they go and order it today and they start reading it right away, or they're like me with Solenoid, they buy it because it's being talked about and it sits on the shelf for a year, but then they finally pick it up. Like, I just think we should take advantage of the different epoch that we're in, and not wait 50, 100 years for someone to be like, oh my God, this book that was published in 2024 is fantastic. It's too bad that no one heard of the author while he was alive.
Right. Right.
So,
yeah, I've grown to really appreciate how much of a communal experience reading can be. It's obviously a solo, typically a solo endeavor when you're actually doing it, but there is a lot of motivation to read something at the same time as other people.
Definitely.
Because I think like our Life on Books book club, shameless plug, is great because like with Hard Rain Falling, we had a great discussion in the chat room about it, and people were like pointing out things. I'm like, oh yeah, I missed that, or I didn't think of it in that way, and so it just kind of like enriched the experience of the book for me.
Yeah. I mean, look at what I just said about Infinite Chess. Like, I was like, if you read that, I'm going to be very tempted to start it as well.
Right.
And
yeah. So it's important to do to give those authors that shine on social media, I think.
Yeah.
And I also really encourage anybody to share their opinion. I think it was maybe it was Literary Wendy on Instagram. She just started doing YouTube videos, and I think she had, maybe it was somebody else, but I think she had said that, oh, I don't know if like people would want to hear from me because like I'm not an expert. I'm an idiot. Like, what are you talking about? I didn't even graduate college. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it you don't have to be an expert. I mean, I certainly appreciate anybody who's an actual professional critic who, pursued a master of fine arts in literature or whatever. But you can't always deduce or reduce a work to specific elements that make it great.
Right.
I mean, that's really what professional critics do. They've been trained on, here's the elements to look for, here's how to interpret them. And people do that with social media too, right? Like there's courses you can take on social media on how to have your video go viral or whatever. And sure, you can take what's working and reverse engineer it and break it down to its individual parts, but even sometimes checking all those boxes, it doesn't produce the effect you want.
Right.
Like there are just some people that naturally have it. Like they just get on camera and their true personality comes through and really connects with people. And same thing with artistry. Like, yeah, you can go to school to be a writer, but like there's some people that just like, I just decided to write a book and it was the greatest thing you ever read. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah. Anywho, let's keep this trucking along here. My second pick is quite a famous opening line. It's from Albert Camus' The Stranger. And this was originally written in French because Camus is Algerian, where they speak French because they were colonized. Translator's note, blah, 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 blah. I don't love this book. It's good. It's not like a top 5 for me or anything. But the opening line is quite famous. Mother died today or yesterday, maybe. I don't know. And so the whole book is about absurdism or nihilism, which is kind of this like morose perspective on life and the world. And that opening line kind of highlights just how like apathetic the character is to everything that's happening. Can't even be bothered to like remember which day his mother passed away, and it was within the last 48 hours.
Right.
One of the reasons why I chose that line, I mean, it is a brilliant opening line, but apparently there is controversy about the translation of that.
I think I've heard that.
Yeah, and so I just thought that was kind of interesting. So I'm not enough of an expert on translation or even, just the book in general to speak deeply on what the controversy is. But some people say that the way it's translated is not really super accurate, and the intention was slightly different. So I just thought it would be interesting to include this. And it is a book that I do feel like you should read. Like, Camus was enough of an important literary figure that if you want to really dig into literature, you'd do well to read The Stranger. It's quite short. You could read it in a single day. I don't know if you'd understand it fully, but yeah, that is my second pick.
Yeah, I read it and I felt similar to you. Like, I liked it. I didn't love it. I got the gist of it.
Yeah.
I think my thing is like my brand of absurdism is more of the like goofy hijinks type of stuff that, like Heller and Pynchon and all those postmodernists go for versus the like very morose and nihilistic.
Yeah, it's more philosophical absurdism,
right,
rather than literary absurdism.
Yeah. But all right. My next pick is You Bright and Risen Angels by William T. Vollmann. This was his debut novel.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize he had been published by Penguin.
This was like a reprint. I don't think they published the...
What's the deal with the orange? So there's books that are all orange from Penguin.
Yep.
And then there's some that have just like this orange and white on the binding. Do you know what the distinction is? Yeah, me either.
Don't.
If anybody knows.
There's probably, different editions, collections, whatever.
Yeah.
I won't give it away because you haven't gotten into it yet. But like, I know one of the books that you have over in your stack is published by Penguin, and they have a series of books that have that kind of like orange, white, orange, whatever. Anyway, this actually, there's an epigraph attributed to Adolf Hitler that starts this book. So
okay,
it's a very strange and aggressive novel.
And to clarify, Vollmann is not a neo-Nazi.
No. Just because they found Martin Bormann's skull doesn't mean he's dead. My best beloved, for everyone knows that competent observers from every neutral country have reported sighting an old man in Argentina whose head is wrapped in bandages and only the hunted eyes show, winking and blinking beneath the thousands of cranial splints. And Anastasia Romanoff, I know her. When Yurovsky and his Cheka men were murdering her family, she fainted and they took her for dead. They piled her into a truck with the others. And while they were getting the hatchets and caustic acids ready, she came to herself, ran into the deep, dark Tasia and flung herself into the arms of the whites just in time, where she was treated as befitted her nobility. And that's how the leopard got its spots.
That's great. Just that first sentence alone
Right?
is awesome.
Yeah.
And so generally, what is the premise of the book? If you could even say.
It's really hard to like get into. It's sort of about a group of people kind of rebelling against the forces of modernity and particularly electricity. Volman kind of uses electricity in this guy who starts like a power company, so to be really reductive of it, and kind of as an allegory for colonialism.
Okay.
The name of the power company is pretty on the nose. It's not exactly subtle. It's white power.
Oh, great. Nice.
So, but just yeah, the kind of revolutionary ideals behind it, and the protagonist Bug, who is one of these revolutionaries. He's not. At first, he kind of seems like he's going to be this righteous hero, and then things aren't as always as they seem, and it's just kind of an allegory of that, like our ideals and things of that nature. So it's been too long since I've read it to really give a more succinct description than that, but it's a really well written and erudite and dense and confusing novel, but definitely a worthwhile read. And we're gonna actually read the where is it? Kind of like an author's note to kicks it off. This book was written by a traitor to his class. It is dedicated to bigots everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen of the black shirts, I call upon you to unite, to strike with claws and kitchen pokers, to burn the grub worms of equalities brewed with sulfur and oil, to huddle together, whispering about the silverfish in your basements, to make decrees in your great, solemn, rotten assemblies concerning what is proper, for you have nothing to lose but your last feeble principles.
Nice. Great. That's a way to kick it off.
Very interesting.
Yeah. All right.
A little aggressive, but
we're definitely getting canceled. Okay. So my next pick is The Brother by Rain Road, who is an Estonian author. This is a open letter translation. They're fantastic. You and I are both big fans of open letter. So this is a Western.
Oh, cool.
Yep. Inspired by the classic American Western, even though this gent is Estonian. I read this earlier this year. A very unique book, kind of it leaves a lot of room for interpretation, which I think is good. And it's just kind of a fun novel or novella. But in the acknowledgments, he says, for those who didn't notice the bows made to Alessandra Barrico and Clint Eastwood hidden in the story, I point them out now. And then he goes into kind of his inspirations.
Yeah.
So the opening line, let's get to that, or the opening paragraph is quite funny or quite interesting. Here we go. The day that had begun bright with sunshine darkened abruptly into clouds in the afternoon, and the couple booms of thunder were followed by a downpour so heavy that not a single window was left open in the small town. Nothing and no one occupied the main square apart from a taxi, the driver of which was also already about to lose hope when he saw approaching from the opposite side of the square a tall man dressed in a wide-brimmed hat, a drenched overcoat and knee-high boots, and who was strolling toward him through the storm with an unflinching tranquility as if he paid no heed to the dreadful weather. He'll get the car wet, the taxi driver thought, but at least I won't have been sitting here for nothing. The man, indeed, stopped next to the taxi and opened the door. Are you free? He asked. Yes, I am, the taxi driver replied. Then that makes two of us, the man said, slammed the door shut, and strolled onward through the rain and into the howling darkness.
All right.
So it's just, I just love the response. Like, are you free? And yes, and so am I. And like,
Yeah.
And then he just like doesn't even get in. He just walks on.
That's great.
Yeah, you read that and you're like, what is going on here? And really cool thing about the book, it's not really a spoiler because you understand what's happening with this strategy or this device quite quickly, but none of the men in the book have names. They're all referred to by their like profession or their relationship to another character.
Interesting.
So, the title of the book's The Brother.
Right.
The taxi driver, the lawyer, the doctor.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cool book.
Cool.
Yeah.
That sounds really good.
Yeah. I think you would like it. All right.
I'm going to take it home with me.
Cool. You have, I have a very short book here. You have a very large one.
Yes. Yep. Up next, I have the instructions by Adam Levin, all 1,000 pages of it. I read this earlier this year. It's a fantastic novel. I know I talked about it quite a bit, both while I was reading it in one of our yet to be aired episodes, and I talked about how much I enjoyed it at some point after we finished it. This particular edition is out of print, but you can probably find it somewhere online. Or shout out to McSweeney's. They just released the Bar Mitzvah 2-volume edition, which has some really cool cover art and is a really, really stunning book. So if you're interested, now's a great time to get yourself a copy and check it out. So I'm going to read the whole opening paragraph. Benji Nakamook thought we should waterboard each other. Me and him and Vincy Portite. We wouldn't count the seconds to see who was bravest or whose lungs were deepest. This wasn't for a contest. We'd each be held under till the moment the possibility of death became real to us. And in that moment, according to Benji, we'd have to draw one of the following conclusions. My best friends are about to accidentally drown me, or my best friends are actually trying to drown me. The point was to learn what it was we feared more, being misunderstood or being betrayed.
That's good.
Yeah. And I think that kind of final, like what we feared most, being misunderstood or being betrayed, those kind of themes and ideas of misunderstanding and betrayal come up so frequently throughout the novel.
Not only is that book 1,000 pages, but it's a tall book.
Oh, dude, hold that in your hand. Like
that's a weapon.
Yeah. It's a brick if there ever was one, but
how would you rate it in terms of difficulty? Like the writing itself?
I wouldn't say it's very difficult. One thing that's it's linear. There's some like, jumping back and kind of flashbacks. But there's not like a ton of jumping around. Actually, all of this, if you can believe it, it's 4 days in this character's life.
Okay.
So, but it's, and there's, pretty much everything follows the protagonist, Gurion Maccabee. There's not like, there's a lot of characters, but it's not like something like Infinite Jest where there's a lot of characters and it jumps from these two in this scene that happened a year ago to these four in this place that happened is happening in real time to these three characters at home 10 years ago. Like it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I would put it difficulty wise kind of in that same vein as Infinite Jest, probably a little bit easier. Not to diminish the writing of the instructions because it is a very well written book and the writing is really special, but like it's not so dense that you have to like struggle to understand what's happening. You kind of have to pay attention, but you can't just like skim through it. But there's not a lot of, it does not require a ton of effort in comparison to some other 1,000 1,000-page bricks that you see.
Yeah. I
getting
mean, that's the
thrown around.
challenging thing about something like Infinite Jest.
Right.
It's long and it's a somewhat challenging read.
Right.
Gravity's Rainbow, 700-ish pages, very challenging read.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
cool. It's funny that that was the book you just mentioned, because my next selection is a McSweeney's. I wasn't sure. I actually wanted to ask you if you were going to put this on your list.
You know what's funny is I was like looking at my shelves this morning, kind of picking like the last book or two I was going to bring. And I saw that and I was like, that had a really good opening. I was like, you know what? Tony's going to pick that. Like
Yeah.
I almost did the same thing. I almost messaged you and I was like, it's going to be on his list. So.
Yeah. So this is Pay As You Go by Escar David Johnson. And this came out in 2023. It's his debut novel. We actually interviewed Escar in New York City. I highly recommend watching that podcast episode if you haven't yet. And he does read the first page in that episode, which he does fantastically. In fact, so fantastically that we just got a comment on the little clip of it on social media.
I think that was on his post where he shared the clip.
Yeah.
But still, yeah.
Yeah. Someone was like, "Oh, you have a beautiful, sexy voice," or something like
Yeah.
that. It was very, very bizarre.
So congratulations to you, Escar, on the fantastic novel and the beautiful, sexy voice.
Yeah, and it does have a great. I won't read the whole opening, but just the first couple lines. But he had said something when we interviewed him, which was like, if I can just get people to the first page,
Right.
I know I can get them to read my book, and that really is probably such a struggle for authors to do. You have so many books to choose from. Just to even like crack it open and start reading it's a big ask. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I like to pull stuff off my shelf and just like read a little bit randomly. And sometimes I'm like, I'm not in the mood for that. Or sometimes I'm like, okay, this is what I'm reading next.
Right.
So Electric Day is the name of the chapter. My first apartment in Polis, it was complete. I used to say to the man Calumet, "Hey, Calumet, how come we're here living like it, huh?" Calumet would say, "What you mean?" And I would say, "I mean, look at the toilet. It isn't flushing properly, and the shitty paint job, it's peeling in all the wrong places. I swear sometimes at night, pieces of paint are landing in my mouth, and I wake up choking. There's never any juice in the fridge, and I don't like the sound of the doorbell. When the doorbell rings, it makes me jump. We should get a gentler doorbell is all. The windows are dusty, and they don't look out onto anything. It's like the sky's never blue when I look out any of these windows." And he goes on and complains about the apartment that they're living in. And on the next page, this passage ends with, "What kind of life is this?" And then Calumet would say, "Ooh wee, for fuck's sake, man, you've been here for a week. You've only been here for a week."
Yeah.
So I love that intro for so many reasons. One, I think it's very difficult to use profanity in writing and have it not be cringy or corny.
Right.
I think it does that very well. It definitely has that a little bit of postmodern absurdism to it with the repetition of the word, and that's kind of appreciated. And then, all the things that this character is pointing out about the living conditions is very much a good job of showing, not telling. And so you do get a good sense of what the living conditions are like. But also you really are shown right away this character's kind of whiny attitude.
Right. Yeah.
And so the response from Calumet, he has all these complaints, which, you might think, okay, that's legit or not. But then the guy's like, "Dude, you've been here for a week." And it's just like, okay,
Right.
this guy's just a little baby.
Yeah.
So excellent opening page, Pay As You Go. This was both in our top 5 for books that we read last year that we liked. And so if you haven't read this, I would highly recommend it. We'd done a giveaway for this book, and the person who I just pulled at random, I sent them a message, They didn't respond. I kind of forgot about it. I went back and looked, and I can't find their account now. So either it doesn't exist or they blocked me for some reason. I don't know what the deal with that would be. So I actually need to do another drawing on this one.
Wow.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
somebody's
Cool.
still going to win a copy of Pay As You Go.
Great.
Yeah. But everyone else has been receiving the books that we've been doing giveaways on. So that's good.
Right on. Right on.
Yeah.
My next pick is another one that was kind of easily predictable.
Yeah.
It is Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. It's funny when I first messaged you like, hey, this would be a good idea for the pod. You were like, all right, 100 Years of Solitude, Gravity's Rainbow. Like, what else are you going to pick? And I said another Pynchon, which I also have next to me. But, I was thinking about it and I was like, anytime I think about like strong opening lines that really just stick with you, this book and particularly the opening line to Gravity's Rainbow just like always jumps out at me. And as much as I talk about this book and would try to get away from it and talk about other things, I felt like it would be a little bit like disingenuous to leave it out just for the sake of variety.
I agree. Yeah.
So
Andy reads Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon.
just a 8-week-long audiobook of me reading Gravity's Rainbow. A screaming comes across the sky. It has happened before, but there is nothing to compare it to now.
Yeah. So there's a lot of hype around how difficult of a book Gravity's Rainbow is. And I remember reading the first couple pages and thinking, I got this. And then like 2 or 3 chapters in, you're like, God, I do not got this.
Yeah. As soon as it goes from like I don't even think I made it that many chapters in before I was like, wait, what? Like,
yeah. There's a lot of rereading.
Yeah.
So a lot of people recommend the practice, and not specifically with this book, but recommend the practice of listening to an audiobook while you read along. And I thought, okay, I'll try that with this. Maybe that'll help. And I thought that was worse. The narrator does a good job-ish, but it just, I don't know. It's like reading it, like hearing it aloud just made it more confusing to me.
I feel like listening to that on audiobook would be so confusing.
Yeah. I mean, props to the dude that did the recording, because it's got to be a time-intensive process anyway with all the retakes and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Doing it with Gravity's Rainbow. I hope they paid him well.
Probably not.
Probably not.
But yeah, it's just it's 2 sentences.
Yeah.
3? No, 2. That it just, stands out so much. Obviously a screaming comes across the sky. That's the V2 rocket.
Yeah.
It has happened before. There's nothing to compare it to now. You can kind of get a couple different meanings on that. Like, okay, rockets and bombs have been a thing for a while at this point, but the V2 was kind of the next iteration of this aerial warfare that like nothing that had come preceded it is comparable.
Right.
And then you also get there's nothing to compare it to now because, the thing about the V2 that made it so terror-inducing was that you don't hear it until after it struck.
Yeah.
So, if you hear that screaming across the sky, you're safe.
Right.
There's another neighborhood or section of the city or whatever, a mile away, 2 mile, whatever, that's been blown to smithereens. And there's nothing to compare it to anymore because it's gone. You heard this terror coming through the sky and you know that you're like, how f***ed up is that? Like,
yeah,
you only by hearing it do you know that you were spared from it.
Yeah, there's so many books. Gravity's Rainbow stands alone in terms of style. There's really nothing else like it that I've ever seen. But I do appreciate that Pynchon incorporated the sound of, the rocket as a kind of a theme or device, because a lot of books about war play heavily on the sounds of war are so unique. And there's a lot of books that kind of talk about that, whether they're memoirs or fictions, just people who have been in the trenches so long, they can distinguish between, an AK-47 and some other type of automatic rifle sound, or, whether the bombardment is, going to hit them or not, or, you know what I mean? So it's, I think there's a huge psychological component to the sound of war. And Pynchon does a cool job with it. And the opening is, like you said, it's just kind of like terrifying. But that juxtaposition of, striking fear into your heart, but then also relief that it's not you, but then guilt for feeling happy that it's not you. And yeah. So, super glad you included that. Would have been disappointed and surprised had you not. So my final pick is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. One of my favorite books, by one of my favorite authors. And what I love about the beginning of this is, I will read it to you and I'll explain. The Salinas Valley is in Northern California. So I'm just going to stop there. This is like considered Steinbeck's like magnum opus. It's his longest book. It's somewhat grandiose in how much time it covers and the amount of characters it covers. It's essentially, it's got many biblical allusions and is based on biblical stories, which are grandiose. And I just love how like mundane that opening line is. And you're just like, oh, okay. Like here's this 600-page book and we're in Northern California. Okay, cool.
And I'm getting a geography lesson.
Yeah. And so it's very like plain and unassuming, and you don't really know what you're in for. Not that this is like some epic tale, but it's just a big story.
Yeah.
And it's just such a plain line. So maybe perhaps a little anticlimactic to choose this as my final opening line. But I just thought, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I do think that's kind of clever and interesting. And, Steinbeck is kind of, I think, known for his beautiful descriptions, but they're always a little understated in the same time. So I just thought that was fitting and a great opening to this big, grand book.
Yeah, I think that fits very well with Steinbeck. I think one of the beautiful things about him is not that anything that he writes is simple, but he tends to get to the root of very simple things.
Yeah.
And the grandiosity and the, just the depth of them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very apt, pick and very fitting for Steinbeck. Just like this is in Northern California.
Yeah. And it's, all of his books really, they're usually very emotionally damaging.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoy the fact that it's just like a little humdrum.
Right.
And it kind of lures you in, like, oh, okay, whatever. And then you're not really expecting the vicious right hook that's coming later on. So,
yeah.
So anything else you have one more book. That's right. You have one more.
Oh.
I forgot you did 6.
Yeah.
I have another book here, but it's not for this. It's just to give you, because you said you wanted a copy.
Cool. So yeah, I have one more pick. It is Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon.
Yep.
I was saying when we were talking about this and you were like, oh, you're going to pick 100 Years of Solitude and Gravity's Rainbow. I was like, I might actually pick Mason and Dixon. I do think that, just the lore behind it and everything like that. Like obviously the opening line to Gravity's Rainbow has a little bit more sticking power. It really packs that punch, but I really love the opening to Mason and Dixon. Snowballs have flown their arcs, starred the sides of outbuildings as if cousins carried hats away into the brisk wind off Delaware. The sleds are brought in and their runners carefully dried and greased, shoes deposited in the back hall, a stockinged foot descent made upon the great kitchen, and a purposeful dither since morning, punctuated by the ringing ringing lids of various boilers and stewing pots, fragrant with pie spices, peeled fruits, suet, heated sugar, the children having all upon the fly, among rhythmic slaps of batter and spoon, coaxed and stolen what they might, proceed as upon each other all this snowy advent to a comfortable room at the rear of the house, years since given over to their carefree assaults. And I just think, especially with the opening kind of section there, snowballs have flown their arcs. I think you kind of get that juxtaposition between Gravity's Rainbow and this. Like
That came out after?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, there's rockets and terror and,
Right.
you know, warfare. And this is just kids throwing snowballs at Christmas time before running inside. And I think you still have the kind of chaos that you get in the opening of Gravity's Rainbow, but the context and the setting and the attitude and spirit are so different that I think it's just an interesting kind of juxtaposition.
That felt a little less Pynchon-esque than a lot of other Pynchon.
As you get into it, it definitely is more Pynchon-y, but this one is very interesting. So it's about Mason and Dixon, and you know the kind of marking of the Mason and Dixon line.
Yeah.
And it's written in that, oh God, was it 1600s or 1700s? That kind of pastiche of the way that people spoke and okay, so it was during the 18th century. So just that kind of mannerisms and people spoke and wrote in that time period.
Yeah. It's always weird to me that people used to have such poetic sounding speech in a time where literacy was pretty rare.
Yeah.
Like the ability to read and write was like not that common, but like even kind of less educated people had really flowery speech. It was just, I don't know.
Yeah. But you know, it definitely has a lot of characteristic Pynchon elements.
Like 3,000 characters.
Yes. And paranoia and systems of control and things like that. But I think compared to some of his other novels, it's a lot more character driven, and just as a whole, it's a lot more wholesome.
Cool.
So,
all right. Those are some of our favorite opening lines and passages from some books that we've enjoyed. What's your favorite opening line to a book? Drop it in the comments. I would be interested to hear. I think much like a book cover, a strong opening page can really set the tone and reel you in. And they say not to judge a book by a cover, but I do it all the time. And I judge books by their first page all the time as well. So anything else you would like to add, Andy? Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.